The rain fell softly on Seattle's skyline, a gentle patter against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sarah Mitchell's office. At 32, she was the co-founder and chief operating officer of FreightFlow, a rising star in the logistics tech world. Her days were a blur of meetings, data reviews, and late-night strategy sessions, all fueled by a quiet obsession with making the world move smarter. FreightFlow's AI didn't just reroute trucks. It slashed carbon emissions by 25%, saved retailers millions, and turned empty highways into stories of efficiency. Sarah wasn't just running a company. She was rewriting the rules of possibility. Yet, as she sat at her desk, her laptop glowing with a quarterly report, her phone buzzed with a message that stopped her cold. It was from her father back in Charleston, South Carolina. "Sarah, stay away from your mom's birthday. Let's keep the peace." She read it again. The words stung, sharp and deliberate, like a door slammed in her face. Her mother's 60th birthday was a week away, a milestone meant for celebration, for family. Charleston's cobblestone streets, lined with magnolia trees, would come alive with laughter at the Palmetto House, the city's finest restaurant. Sarah could picture it. White tablecloths, candlelight, her mother's warm smile at the center of it all. But she wasn't invited. Her father's text wasn't a suggestion. It was a ban. She leaned back in her chair, the Seattle skyline blurring through the rain. For a moment, she wasn't the COO commanding boardrooms. She was 15 again, standing on the edge of her family's world, never quite fitting in. Sarah grew up in Charleston, where tradition was as thick as the humid summer air. Her father, Thomas, was a retired school principal, a man of routine who valued predictability. Her mother, Ellen, was the heart of the family, her kindness a quiet force that held everyone together. Sarah's younger sister, Lily, was the golden child, married at 25, a mother of two, working part-time at a local credit union. Lily's life was a postcard of Southern charm, the kind their parents understood. Sarah was different. At 16, she'd spend hours in the school library, teaching herself to code on an old desktop. By 18, she was dreaming of System Show to make things faster, smarter, better. Her father called it fidgeting with machines. Her mother listened, but never quite grasped it. When Sarah left Charleston at 21, with $500 and a half-finished computer science degree, she wasn't just leaving home. She was breaking a mold. In Seattle, she built FreightFlow from a dorm room idea into a powerhouse. Her team of 50 half-women, many from underrepresented backgrounds, designed AI models that predicted traffic patterns, optimized fuel use, and rerouted deliveries in real time. Last month, Sarah had stood in a sleek conference room, pitching to investors who wrote a $20 million check for their Series B round. She wore a tailored navy blazer, her dark hair pulled into a low bun, her voice steady as she explained how FreightFlow wasn't just a business but a movement. The room applauded. Her team cheered. Yet, back in Charleston, her father thought she was still tinkering, scraping by in a cramped apartment. The truth was, Sarah lived in a light-filled loft in Capitol Hill, ran a community garden on weekends, and mentored young women in tech. She'd made it. But to her family, she was the daughter who'd strayed too far. The text from her father wasn't a surprise, but it hurt all the same. Sarah set her phone down and walked to the window. Rain streaked the glass, mirroring the ache in her chest. She thought of her mother, Ellen, who'd always loved azaleas and made the best pecan pie. Sarah hadn't seen her in a year. Not since a brief Christmas visit where her father's silence spoke louder than words. He'd never forgiven her for leaving, for choosing a life he couldn't understand. Lily, meanwhile, was the family's anchor, living 5 miles from their parents, her kids' photos plastered on their fridge. Sarah didn't resent Lily. She loved her sister's warmth, her easy laugh. But she knew Lily's life was the blueprint their parents had wanted for her too. Marry young, stay close. Don't ask questions the world can't answer. Sarah's fingers traced the edge of her desk, where a small potted succulent Seda gift from her team. She'd always loved growing things, a habit she'd picked up from her mother. In Charleston, they'd spent summers tending a backyard garden, Ellen teaching her how to coax life from soil. Those moments were Sarah's tether to home, a reminder of love that didn't demand conformity. Now, excluded from her mother's birthday, Sarah felt that tether fray. She opened her laptop, trying to focus on a client email, but her mind drifted to a memory. She was 12, building a model bridge from popsicle sticks for a science fair. Her father had glanced at it, muttered, "Cute," and walked away. Her mother, though, had knelt beside her asking, "How does it hold so much weight?" That question had sparked something in Saraha hunger, to create, to solve, to prove. She picked up her phone again, scrolling through her messages. Lily had sent a group chat screenshot earlier that day, a forwarded invite to the birthday party. "Did you see this?" Lily wrote, her tone casual, almost apologetic. Sarah scanned the list. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even their old piano teacher. Everyone but her. The exclusion wasn't an oversight. It was a choice. She called her father, her heart pounding. No answer. She texted back, "Dad, I'd love to come. Can I RSVP?" Hours passed. Then his reply, "Sarah, stay away. Let's keep the peace." The words echoed in her mind. Keep the peace. As if her presence was a storm, her existence, a disruption. Sarah closed her eyes, breathing deeply. She wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier. Instead, she felt a quiet curiosity, a need to understand why her family saw her as a threat. Was it her career? Her independence? The fact that she'd built a life without their permission? In Charleston, success looked like Lily's husband, kids, a picket fence. Sarah's success was messier, harder to define. She led a company that changed lives, but to her father, it was invisible. She didn't fit their story, so they'd written her out of it. Yet, standing in her office, the hum of Seattle outside, Sarah felt a spark of resolve. She wasn't the girl who'd left Charleston with a backpack and a dream. She was a woman who'd built something real, something undeniable. Her team trusted her. Her clients relied on her. Her community, through her STEM scholarship program, believed in her. She didn't need her family's approval, but she wanted her mother's smile, her laughter, her pride. Sarah walked to her bookshelf, pulling out a worn journal. She'd started it years ago, a place to process the distance between who she was and who her family wanted her to be. She flipped to a blank page and wrote, "They don't see me, but I'll show up anyway, not to fight. To be seen." The rain slowed to a drizzle, and Sarah looked out at the city she'd made her home. She thought of her garden, where she'd planted lavender that morning, its scent lingering on her hands. She thought of her mother, who'd once said, "You're my dreamer, Sarah." And she thought of the party she wasn't invited to, the room full of people who'd never know what she'd become unless she walked through that door. Her father's words, "Stay away," hung heavy, but they didn't define her. She did. And in that moment, Sarah knew she'd go to Charleston, not to prove them wrong, but to remind herself who she was: a daughter, a leader, a woman who'd learned to grow where she was planted, even when the soil felt like stone. The Seattle sunrise painted the horizon in hues of amber and pink, casting a glow over the freight flow office where Sarah Mitchell stood, coffee in hand, watching her team arrive. At 32, Sarah was more than the co-founder and chief operating officer of this AI logistics startup. She was its heartbeat. Freightflow wasn't just a company, it was a revolution, using machine learning to optimize supply chains, cut shipping emissions by 25%, and save retailers millions. Every algorithm, every data point, was a step toward a world that moved smarter, greener, better. Sarah had built this from a spark of an idea in a college dorm. And now, as she surveyed the open-plan office vibrant with collaboration, she felt a quiet pride. Yet, beneath that pride lay a shadow. Back in Charleston, South Carolina, her family saw none of this. To them, she was still the restless daughter, lost in a world of computer tinkering. Sarah's office was a blend of function and warmth, a standing desk cluttered with reports, a potted lavender plant from her urban garden, and a framed photo from Freightflow's first client win. Her team of 50 half women, many from underrepresented backgrounds, was her chosen family. They weren't just employees. They were innovators, dreamers, people who believed in her vision. Last week, Sarah had led a retreat in the Olympic National Forest, where her team hiked rain-soaked trails and brainstormed under starlit skies. She'd watched Priya, a senior data scientist, sketch a new routing model on a napkin, and Jamal, a junior engineer, pitch a bold idea to integrate weather data. Sarah didn't just manage them. She inspired them, challenged them, trusted them. At the retreat's closing campfire, she'd spoken from the heart. "We're not here to follow the rules. We're here to rewrite them." The team's applause echoed in her memory, a reminder of what she'd built. FreightFlow's impact was undeniable. Their AI models analyzed traffic patterns, fuel costs, and delivery schedules in real time, rerouting trucks to avoid empty miles. For a major retailer, this meant a 30% drop in last-mile costs. For the planet, it meant fewer emissions, a step towards sustainability. Just 2 months ago, Sarah had stood in a sleek Seattle boardroom, pitching to a room of investors. Her navy blazer was crisp, her voice steady as she unveiled a $20 million Series B funding round. "FreightFlow isn't just about logistics," she'd said. "It's about possibility-moving goods, ideas, and hope." The investors signed the deal that night. The victory wasn't just financial. It was personal. Every milestone was proof that Sarah's choice to leave Charleston at 21 with $500 and a half-finished degree had been worth it. But in Charleston, her father, Thomas, saw a different story. To him, Sarah was still the girl who'd abandoned tradition, chasing a life he couldn't comprehend. He pictured her in a cramped studio, hunched over a laptop, struggling to pay rent. He'd once told a cousin she was doing some tech stuff, his tone dismissive, as if her work was a hobby. Sarah's mother, Ellen, was kinder but no less distant. She'd ask vague questions about computers during holiday calls, her voice warm but puzzled. Only Lily, Sarah's younger sister, seemed to glimpse her world, though even she didn't fully understand. Lily was 28, married, with 2 kids, and a part-time job at a Charleston credit union. Her life fit their parents' blueprint: safe, local, predictable. Family dinners at their childhood home revolved around Lily's StoryShare, kids' soccer games, her church bake sales. Sarah's calls from Seattle, filled with talk of algorithms and investor meetings, felt like dispatches from another planet. The contrast gnawed at Sarah, though she rarely admitted it. She opened her laptop, pulling up a draft for FreightFlow's latest initiative, a STEM scholarship for underrepresented youth in Seattle. She'd launched it last year, inspired by her own struggles as a young woman in tech. The program had already funded 10 students, one of whom, a 17-year-old named Aisha, had just won a national coding competition. Sarah had mentored Aisha herself, spending late evenings reviewing her code. At the awards ceremony, Aisha hugged her, whispering, "You made me believe I could do this." Moments like that were Sarah's fuel, proof that her work rippled beyond profit margins. She wasn't just building a company, she was building futures. Yet, as she typed, her father's text from yesterday lingered in her mind. "Sarah, stay away from your mom's birthday. Let's keep the peace." The words were a wall, built brick by brick over years of misunderstanding. Sarah remembered a Christmas visit 2 years ago, sitting at her parents' dining table. Her father had barely spoken, his eyes fixed on the television. When she mentioned a new client win, he'd nodded absently, then asked Lily about her kids. Sarah had smiled, hiding the sting. She hadn't expected praise, but she'd hoped for curiosity, a single question about her world. Instead, she got silence. Her mother tried to bridge the gap, asking, "Are you happy out there, Sarah?" But even that felt like a plea for reassurance, not understanding. Sarah stood, walking to the office's communal kitchen, where her team was brewing coffee and swapping ideas. She loved the space whiteboards covered in equations, laughter mixing with the hum of laptops. It was the opposite of Charleston's rigidity, where her father's world was bound by church schedules and neighborhood gossip. Thomas valued stability, a life you could measure in miles from home. Lily's house, 5 miles from their parents, was a triumph. Sarah's loft in Capitol Hill, with its view of Puget Sound, was a mystery. He didn't know she'd bought it last year, or that she hosted team dinners there, serving her mother's pecan pie recipe. He didn't know she'd turned her balcony into a garden, growing lavender and thyme, a nod to the Charleston summers she still cherished. She poured a second coffee, her thoughts drifting to Lily. Her sister wasn't cruel, just comfortable. Lily's life was a mirror of their parents' values, and Sarah didn't fault her for it. But she wondered if Lily ever felt the weight of being the good daughter. During their last call, Lily had mentioned her boyfriend, Nate, starting a job at a tech firm. "Funny," she'd said. "I think it's yours." Sarah hadn't connected the dots then, but the idea intrigued her. Nate, a stranger from Lily's world, would soon step into hers. Would he see her as her family did, a dreamer gone astrayer as her team did? A leader who turned visions into reality? Sarah returned to her desk, opening a photo from the retreat. Her team stood on a forest trail, muddy boots and wide smiles, Sarah at the center. She wasn't just their boss. She was their compass, guiding them through challenges with clarity and trust. That trust was what her family couldn't offer. They didn't see the nights she'd spent debugging code, the rejections from early investors, the moments she doubted herself but kept going. They didn't see the scholarship kids who called her a hero, or the clients who thanked her for saving their bottom line. To them, she was a shadow, a name rarely mentioned at family gatherings. But Sarah wasn't invisible. She was undeniable. She closed the photo, her gaze settling on the lavender plant. It thrived here, far from Charleston's soil, just as she had. Her father's text, his insistence that she stay away, wasn't about peace. It was about control, about keeping her small so their world made sense. Sarah didn't need their world anymore. She'd built her own, one where barriers were broken, futures were shaped, and dreams were real. As the Seattle sun climbed higher, she made a silent vow. She'd go to that birthday, not to beg for a place at their table, but to show them the woman she'd become. Not their Sarah, hers. The Seattle dusk settled over Sarah Mitchell's loft, the city's lights flickering like stars against the Puget Sound. At 32, Sarah was the co-founder and chief operating officer of FreightFlow, a logistics AI startup that was rewriting the rules of supply chains. Her days were filled with the hum of innovation, leading a team of 50 to cut shipping emissions, mentoring young coders, securing million-dollar deals. But tonight, as she sat on her balcony, a cup of chamomile tea cooling in her hands, her phone lit up with a message that pulled her back to Charleston, South Carolina. It was from her sister, Lily, a screenshot of an invitation to their mother's 60th birthday at the Palmetto House, Charleston's grandest restaurant. Lily's note was brief, almost hesitant. "Did you see this?" Sarah scrolled through the guest list. Aunts, uncles, cousins, even their old pastor. Everyone but her. The omission wasn't a mistake. It was a wall, and it hurt more than she expected. Sarah set her phone down, the tea forgotten. The balcony's lavender plants, grown from her urban garden, swayed in the breeze, their scent grounding her. She'd always found solace in growing things, a habit inherited from her mother, Ellen, who taught her to nurture life in their Charleston backyard. But now, that connection felt fragile. Her father, Thomas, had made it clear she wasn't welcome at the birthday celebration. His text from 2 days ago still burned in her memory. "Sarah, stay away. Let's keep the peace." The words were cold, final, as if her presence would shatter some delicate balance. She'd called him immediately, her heart racing, but he didn't answer. She texted back, her fingers trembling. "Dad, I'd love to come. Can I RSVP?" Hours later, his reply echoed the first. "Sarah, stay away. Let's keep the peace." Each word was a brick in the wall he'd built between them. A wall that had started when she left Charleston at 21 with $500 and a dream. She stood, pacing the loft's hardwood floors, her navy blazer draped over a chair. FreightFlow's success, $20 million in funding. A 25% reduction in emissions for clients was proof she'd made the right choice. But success didn't erase the ache of being unseen by her family. Her father thought she was still a drifter, coding in some Seattle basement. Her mother, Ellen, asked about her life with warmth but never depth. Only Lily, her younger sister, seemed to straddle both worlds, though her life married, 2 kids, a Charleston credit union job was the one their parents celebrated. Sarah didn't resent Lily's ease, her place at the family table. But she wondered why her own seat had been taken away. She opened her journal, a leather-bound book she'd kept since her early days in Seattle. It was her sanctuary, a place to untangle the distance between who she was and who her family wanted her to be. She flipped to a recent entry, written after a call with her mentor, Dr. Clara Evans, a tech pioneer who'd seen Sarah's potential at a coding boot camp. Clara's words had stayed with her. Show up as you are, not as they expect. Sarah traced the sentence with her finger, her heart steadying. She wrote now, her pen moving swiftly. They don't want me there. But I'm not invisible. I'm not the problem. I'm the truth they're afraid to face. The act of writing grounded her, each word a step toward clarity. Sarah thought back to her childhood in Charleston, where tradition clung like ivy to every decision. At 16, she'd built a delivery app for a school project, dreaming of systems that could move the world. Her father had called it cute, his eyes already on Lily's dance recital photos. Her mother had listened, her smile soft, but her questions stopped short of understanding. When Sarah left for Seattle, she wasn't just chasing a career. She was chasing a life where her ideas mattered. She'd arrived with a backpack, a half-finished computer science degree, and a fire to prove herself. The first years were brutal ramen dinners, rejected pitches, sleepless nights debugging code. But every failure taught her resilience. Every success built her confidence. Freightflow was her answer to the world, a testament to what happened when you dared to dream beyond the lines drawn for you. Now, staring at Lily's screenshot, Sarah felt that fire flicker. The guest list was a mirror of her father's priorities. Family, church, community, all neatly ordered. Sarah's life or loft, her team, her urban garden didn't fit. She wasn't the daughter who stayed, who married, who lived 5 miles from home. She was the one who'd left, who'd built a company that changed lives but couldn't change her father's mind. She closed the journal, her gaze settling on a photo on her bookshelf. It was from Freightflow's first office, a cramped space where she and her co-founder had celebrated their first client with cheap pizza. That Sarah, 25 and scrappy, would have crumbled under her father's rejection. This Sarah, 32 and steady, was different. She walked to her kitchen, pulling out her mother's pecan pie recipe, a ritual she'd started when homesickness hit. As she measured flour, her mind churned. Why did her father fear her presence? Was it her independence, her success, or something deeper the way she challenged his worldview? In Charleston, women like Lily were celebrated. Wives, mothers, pillars of the community. Sarah was a puzzle. A woman who led boardrooms and mentored coders, who didn't need a husband or a hometown to define her. She pressed the pie dough into a tin, her hands steady. The act was a bridge to her mother, a reminder of love that didn't demand conformity. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another message from Lily. I think Dad sent it from his church email. Weird, right? Sarah's lips curved into a half smile. Lily wasn't cruel, just caught in the middle. Sarah replied, Yeah. Weird. Thanks for the heads up. She didn't mention the guest list. Didn't ask why Lily hadn't questioned her exclusion. Instead, she turned back to the pie, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't beg for an invitation. She wouldn't argue or rage. She'd go to Charleston, not to disrupt, but to be seen. To stand in the Palmetto house, look her mother in the eyes, and say, I'm here because I love you. It wasn't about proving her father wrong. It was about proving herself right. She slid the pie into the oven, the warm scent filling the loft. She opened her journal again, writing, I'm going to Charleston. Not for their approval, but for my truth. For Mom's smile. For the girl I was, who dreamed too big for their boxes. Clara's advice echoed. Show up as you are. Asterisk. Sarah closed the journal, her decision made. She'd book the flight tomorrow, after her morning stand-up at Freightflow. She'd walk into that party, not as the daughter they'd erased, but as the woman she'd become leader, dreamer, grower of lavender and futures. The Seattle skyline glittered outside, a canvas of possibility. Sarah wasn't invisible. She was unstoppable. And in Charleston, they'd see her, whether they were ready or not. The Seattle morning buzzed with energy inside Freightflow's open-plan office, where Sarah Mitchell stood at a whiteboard, sketching a new AI routing model. At 32, Sarah was the co-founder and chief operating officer of this logistics startup, a force reshaping supply chains with machine learning that cut emissions and costs. Her navy blazer hung on her chair, her sleeves rolled up, a lavender-scented candle from her urban garden flickering nearby. The office was alive, engineers typing, designers debating, laughter spilling from the kitchen. Sarah thrived here, leading a team of 50 who weren't just colleagues but collaborators in a mission to make the world move smarter. Yet, as she erased a line on the whiteboard, her assistant, Marisol, poked her head in. "Sarah, the new hires are here for orientation. One's early Nate Collins." Sarah froze, her marker hovering. Nate Collins, Lily's boyfriend. The man from her sister's Charleston world, now stepping into hers. Sarah set the marker down, her mind racing. She'd seen Lily's text last week, a casual mention that Nate was starting at some tech company, maybe yours? Sarah hadn't replied, too consumed with FreightFlow's latest project, a hackathon to optimize delivery routes in urban clusters. But now, here he was, a bridge between her past and present. She smoothed her blouse, glancing at a framed photo on her desker team at last month's retreat in the Olympic National Forest, muddy and grinning. That was her world, built on trust and innovation. Nate, with his Charleston roots, was an unknown. Would he see her as her family did a wayward daughter who'd left them behind her, as her team did? A leader who turned dreams into reality? She walked to the glass-walled orientation room, her heels clicking softly. 5 new hires sat around a table, laptops open, but her eyes found Nate instantly. He was 29, broad-shouldered, in a pressed button-down that screamed Midwest manners. He clutched a FreightFlow-branded laptop bag, his knuckles white, his gaze fixed on the table. He hadn't recognized her yet. Sarah's conference badge from a recent AI logistics summit still hung on her lanyard, her name in bold. Sarah Mitchell, Colorado O. She took a breath, her voice steady. "Welcome to FreightFlow. I'm Sarah Mitchell, co-founder and COO. Today, we'll walk through who we are, what we do, and why we expect your best." Nate's head snapped up, his eyes widening. Recognition hit like a wave shock, then disbelief. To his credit, he recovered fast, sitting straighter, his pen poised over a notebook. Sarah clicked through her slides, outlining FreightFlow's mission. Using AI to cut shipping emissions by 25%, saving clients millions while shrinking carbon footprints. She spoke of their $20 million Series B round, their diverse team, their STEM scholarship for underrepresented youth. Her words were clear, her passion infectious, but her eyes flicked to Nate. He was scribbling notes, his jaw tight, as if recalibrating everything he'd heard about her. Sarah knew the stories Lily told in Charleston. Sarah, the selfish sister who'd fled to Seattle, chasing some tech fantasy, thinking she was better than everyone. Nate's presence here, in her domain, was a chance to rewrite that narrative in it for him, but for herself. The orientation ended, and the new hires filed out for HR paperwork. Nate lingered, shifting his weight. Miss Mitchell." Sarah cut him off, her tone warm but firm. "Sarah's fine. Unless you're planning to crash family parties, then maybe stick with ma'am." He laughed, a nervous sound, his dimples flashing. "I had no idea," he said, rubbing his neck. "Lily never said you were the Sarah Mitchell. I mean, FreightFlow's huge." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her smile faint. "Lily doesn't know." "Not really." Nate hesitated, then nodded. "Is it going to be weird, me working here?" Sarah met his gaze, her voice steady. "Only if you make it weird. You're here to build, not gossip. Can you do that?" He exhaled, relief softening his face. "Yeah, I want this. You guys are doing incredible stuff." She nodded. "Then welcome to the team." Sarah returned to her office, her heart still racing. Nate's arrival wasn't just a coincidence. It was a mirror, reflecting the gap between her Charleston past and her Seattle present. She opened her laptop, pulling up a recording for her podcast. Women in Tech. Breaking Ground, a side project she'd launched to amplify voices like hers. Last week, she'd interviewed a young coder who'd overcome homelessness to lead a startup. Recording those stories felt like planting seeds, just like her balcony garden. Nate, with his earnest eyes and Charleston drawl, was another seed, someone who might see her truth if she gave him the chance. That evening, FreightFlow hosted its quarterly hackathon, a 12-hour sprint to solve a routing problem in dense cities. Sarah moved through the office, now lit with string lights, as teams huddled over laptops. She stopped at Nate's group led by Priya, a senior data scientist. Nate was pitching an idea-weighted algorithm to adjust for school zone traffic. His voice was tentative but sharp, his logic sound. Priya nodded, impressed, and Sarah caught Nate's eye. She gave a slight nod, her approval subtle but clear. He grinned, a spark of confidence igniting. Sarah felt it, a flicker of hope that this stranger from her sister's world might understand what her family couldn't quote. She stepped outside, the Seattle air cool against her skin. Her podcast recorder sat in her bag, a reminder of the stories she was building. Nate's arrival was a story too, one she hadn't expected. She thought of her journal, where she'd written last night. "They don't see me, but I'll show up anyway." Nate's shock, his quick respect, was a glimpse of what might happen in Charleston if she walked into the Palmetto house. Not everyone would welcome her, but someone might see her really see her. She remembered her mentor, Clara, saying, "Leadership isn't about being loud, it's about being undeniable." Sarah was undeniable here, in this office, with this team. She walked back inside, the hackathon in full swing. Nate was at a whiteboard, sketching with Priya, his earlier nerves gone. Sarah paused, watching. He wasn't just Lily's boyfriend anymore. He was part of Freight Flow, part of her world. And that meant he'd carry a piece of her truth back to Charleston, whether he knew it or not. Sarah's phone buzzed, a reminder of her flight to Charleston in 3 days. Her father's text, "Stay away," echoed, but it didn't shake her. Nate's presence, his quiet respect, was a sign that her story wasn't finished. She wasn't going to Charleston to beg for a place. She was going to claim it, not with anger, but with the strength she'd built here, in a city that saw her, in a company that trusted her, in a life that was hers. Sarah sat at her desk, opening her journal. She wrote, "Nate saw me today, not as Lily's sister, but as me. Maybe Charleston will too. Maybe it won't. Either way, I'm enough." The hackathon's energy pulsed around her, a reminder of what she'd created. Freight Flow wasn't just a company. It was her proof, her legacy, her voice. And in Charleston, she'd use that voice, not to shout, but to stand. To be seen, to be Sarah. The Seattle skyline shimmered under a late afternoon haze, its glass towers reflecting the promise of a city that never stopped moving. Inside her Capitol Hill loft, Sarah Mitchell stood at her kitchen counter, her hands dusted with flour as she rolled out dough for her mother's pecan pie recipe. At 32, Sarah was the co-founder and chief operating officer of Freight Flow, a logistics AI startup that slashed shipping emissions and redefined efficiency. But today, her focus wasn't on algorithms or boardrooms. It was on Charleston, South Carolina, where her mother, Ellen, would celebrate her 60th birthday in 3 days at the Palmetto house. Sarah wasn't invited. Her father, Thomas, had texted her twice. "Stay away, Sarah. Let's keep the peace." Yet, as she pressed the dough into a tin, Sarah knew she was going. Not to fight, but to honor the woman who'd taught her to dream, and to claim the space her family had tried to deny her. The kitchen smelled of butter and nostalgia, a tether to her Charleston childhood. Sarah had started this ritual baking, her mother's petering her first lonely years in Seattle, when homesickness felt like a bruise. Each step, from chopping pecans to whisking eggs, was a conversation with Ellen, a reminder of summers spent in their backyard garden, planting azaleas under her mother's gentle guidance. Ellen had always been Sarah's quiet champion, her questions about coding projects soft but sincere, even if she didn't fully understand. Now, as Sarah slid the pie into the oven, she thought of her mother's smile, the one she hadn't seen in a year. That smile was worth the 2,400-mile flight, worth facing her father's disapproval, worth the risk of walking into a room where she wasn't wanted. Sarah wiped her hands, her gaze drifting to her laptop, open to a confirmation email for her Charleston flight. She'd booked it last night, after Nate Collins's sister Lily's boyfriend joined Freight Flow and saw her not as the wayward daughter of Charleston lore, but as a leader. Nate's shock during orientation, his quick respect, had lit a spark in Sarah. If a stranger from her sister's world could see her truth, maybe others could too. She opened her journal, a leather-bound refuge where she'd poured her thoughts since arriving in Seattle at 21 with $500 and a half-finished degree. Last night, she'd written a letter to her younger self, a practice her therapist suggested to process the family rift. "Dear Sarah," she'd begun, "you're enough, even when they don't see you. Keep building. Keep loving. Keep going." Reading it now, her throat tightened. She was going to Charleston for that girl, toothed one who'd left home to become herself. She walked to her balcony, where lavender and thyme thrived in pots, a nod to her urban garden. The Seattle air was crisp, carrying the hum of a city that had embraced her. At Freight Flow, Sarah led a team of 50 half-women, many from underrepresented backgrounds, who trusted her to steer them through challenges. Yesterday, she delegated a critical project to Priya, her senior data scientist, confident in her team's ability to handle it while she was gone. That trust was mutual. Her team didn't just work for her. They believed in her vision, a world where logistics didn't just move goods but moved progress. Last month's $20 million Series B round was proof of that vision's power, a milestone her father, Thomas, knew nothing about. To him, she was still tinkering with computers, lost in a Seattle basement. Sarah's phone buzzed, a Slack message from Marisol, her office manager. "Hackathon results are in. Nate's team placed second." Sarah smiled. Nate, new to Freight Flow, had pitched a sharp idea at last week's hackathon, a weighted algorithm for school zone traffic. His confidence, sparked by her nod of approval, reminded her why she led the way she did, with clarity, not control. Nate's presence was a bridge, a link to Charleston that felt less like a threat and more like a possibility. Lily had mentioned him starting at Freight Flow, but Sarah hadn't expected the jolt of seeing him in her orientation room, his eyes widening as he realized she was the COO. His respect, earned in a single morning, was a glimpse of what might happen at the Palmetto House if she showed up as herself. She returned to the kitchen, checking the pie. Its golden crust was perfect, a small victory. Sarah had chosen a gift for her mother, a custom leather journal, embossed with azaleas, filled with blank pages for Ellen to write her stories. It wasn't flashy, but it was personal, a nod to the woman who'd always listened, even when she didn't understand. Sarah imagined handing it to her, their eyes meeting, a moment of connection no one could take away. Her father's texts, "Stay away," echoed, but they didn't sway her. Thomas valued order, a life like Lily's. Married, local, predictable. Sarah's lifer loft, her startup, her STEM scholarship for Seattle youth was chaos to him, a rebellion he couldn't forgive. But Sarah didn't need forgiveness. She needed truth. She sat at her desk opening a file for her podcast. Women in Tech, Breaking Ground. Recording was her way of planting seeds, amplifying voices like the young coder she'd interviewed last week, who'd risen from homelessness to lead a startup. Sarah's latest episode, set to drop tomorrow, was about resilience, her own story, thinly veiled. "You don't need permission to be powerful," she'd said into the mic, her voice steady. That was her mantra now, guiding her to Charleston. She wasn't going to beg for a seat at the family table. She was going to stand, to be seen, to give her mother a moment of love that transcended her father's walls. Sarah's journal lay open, her letter to her younger self staring back. She added a line, "You're going to Charleston, not to prove them wrong, but to prove you right." Her mentor, Clara, had once told her, "Show up as you are, not as they expect." Sarah was ready to do that. She'd wear a tailored green dress, simple but striking, with a Freight Flow pin as a quiet signature. She'd walk into the Palmetto House, not as the daughter they'd erased, but as the woman who'd built a life that mattered. Her team trusted her to lead. Her scholarship kids called her a hero. Her listeners thanked her for inspiration. That was enough to carry her through the doors of a party she wasn't invited to. The pie cooled on the counter, its scent filling the loft. Sarah packed her journal, the gift, and a small photo of her and Ellen from a Charleston summer, laughing in the garden. She thought of Nate, his earnest respect, a sign that her world could touch Charleston's, even briefly. She thought of Lily, caught between loyalty and curiosity, and of Ellen, whose love had never wavered, even in silence. Most of all, she thought of herself not the girl who'd left, but the woman returning, stronger, surer, ready. The Seattle stars emerged, bright against the dusk. Sarah closed her laptop, her heart full. Charleston was waiting, and so was she, not for their approval, but for her truth, for her mother's smile, for the road she'd chosen, and the woman she'd become. The Charleston evening hummed with the scent of magnolias and the glow of gas lanterns as Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her rental car, her heart steady but her breath shallow. The Palmetto House, a historic restaurant with ivy-draped walls and white linen tablecloths, stood before her, its windows spilling warm light. Inside, her mother, Ellen, was celebrating her 60th birthday, surrounded by family and friends. Sarah, at 32, the co-founder and chief operating officer of FreightFlow, a Seattle-based AI logistics startup, wasn't invited. Her father, Thomas, had texted her twice. "Stay away, Sarah. Let's keep the peace." But Sarah had flown 2,400 miles from Seattle, driven by a quiet resolve to honor her mother and claim her place. She adjusted her tailored green dress, a minimalist gold FreightFlow pin glinting on her lapel, and clutched a wrapped gift-a-custom family recipe book, its cover embossed with azaleas. She wasn't here to fight. She was here to be seen. The hostess blinked when Sarah gave her name. "You're not on the list," she said, glancing at the private dining room. Sarah smiled faintly. "That's okay, they're expecting me." Her heels clicked on the polished oak floor as she walked toward the laughter spilling from the back. The room was a tapestry of her past. Long tables adorned with candles, cousins swapping stories, aunts passing platters of shrimp and grits. A guitarist strummed a soft melody in the corner, his notes weaving through the chatter. At the center sat Ellen, radiant in a sapphire blouse, her smile as warm as Sarah remembered. Beside her was Thomas, holding court with a glass of bourbon, his presence commanding. Lily, Sarah's younger sister, sat to Ellen's right, her curls perfect, her laughter easy. And near the end of the table, almost hidden, was Nate Collins, Lily's boyfriend, sipping water, his eyes scanning the room. The air shifted as Sarah entered. Conversations faltered. A cousin nudged an aunt. Eyes turned, some curious, some guarded. Sarah felt the weight of their stares, but kept her gaze on her mother. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his voice cutting through the hush. "Well, look who decided to show up." His tone was laced with mockery, a challenge disguised as a joke. The room tensed, waiting for her response. Sarah ignored him. She walked to Ellen, her steps deliberate, and placed the recipe book in her mother's hands. "Happy birthday, Mom," she said, her voice clear, steady. "This is for you, to hold all the stories you've shared with us." Ellen's eyes widened, her fingers tracing the azalea embossing. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's beautiful." Sarah leaned closer, her words soft. "You taught me to grow things. I wanted to give that back." Ellen's hand pressed to her chest, tears brimming. Before Sarah could say more, Thomas scoffed, his voice louder now. "Quite the entrance, Sarah. Always making it about you." The words landed like a slap, sharp and deliberate. Sarah straightened, ready to turn away, to leave with her dignity intact. But then a voice rang out, firm and clear, from the end of the table. She didn't make this about herself. Every head turned. It was Nate, standing now, his water glass set aside, his eyes locked on Thomas. The guitarist's melody paused, the silence heavy. Nate's voice rose, steady, but fierce. "She gave your wife the most thoughtful gift I've ever seen. And for those who don't know, this is Sarah Mitchell, co-founder and COO of FreightFlow, the company I just joined in Seattle." The room froze. Lily's fork clattered to her plate. An aunt blinked, stunned. Thomas's face paled, his bourbon glass still. Nate pressed on, his gaze sweeping the table. "She's not just my boss. She's the reason I wanted the job. FreightFlow's changing the world, cutting emissions, saving millions, and Sarah leads it with more integrity than anyone I've met. So maybe, instead of snide remarks, we could say thank you for coming, or at least show some respect." He sat down, the air thick with shock. Sarah stood rooted, her heart pounding. Nate's words weren't just a defense. They were a mirror, reflecting the truth she'd built in Seattle, now laid bare in Charleston. Ellen reached for Sarah's hand, squeezing it tightly. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, her voice breaking. Sarah met her mother's eyes, seeing pride, love, and something new understanding. Lily looked away, her expression unreadable. Thomas stared at his glass, silent for the first time. The guitarist resumed, his chords soft, almost mournful. Sarah took a breath, her voice low but firm. "I didn't come to stay long, Mom. I just wanted to see you smile." She stepped back, her gaze sweeping the room. Some faces held awe, others confusion. A cousin's eyes glistened with shame. Sarah turned, her heels clicking softly as she walked out, the recipe book glowing in her mother's hands, the guitarist's melody trailing behind her. Outside, the Charleston night was warm, the stars bright above the cobblestone streets. Sarah leaned against her car, her breath steadying. She'd expected rejection, maybe indifference. Instead, she'd witnessed a reckoning. Nate's voice, his unflinching stand, had cracked the wall her family had built. He'd seen her at FreightFlow leading hackathons, mentoring coders, securing $20 million in funding, and brought that truth to Charleston. Sarah hadn't asked for his defense, but it was a gift, one that shifted something deep within her. She wasn't just the daughter who'd left. She was the woman who'd built a legacy, undeniable even to those who'd tried to erase her. She slipped into her car, the recipe book's creation flashing in her mind. She'd spent weeks compiling it: Ellen's pecan pie, her grandmother's cornbread, stories of family dinners scribbled in the margins. It was more than a gift. It was a bridge, a way to say, "I see you, Mom, even if you don't fully see me." Ellen's tears, her whispered thanks, were enough. Sarah didn't need her father's approval or Lily's understanding. She needed that moment, when her mother's hand held hers, when Nate's words filled the room, when the truth stood taller than the lies. The Palmetto house faded in her rearview mirror, its lights softening. Sarah drove toward her hotel, the Charleston air wrapping around her like a promise. She thought of her Seattle loft, her urban garden, her team at FreightFlow. They were her home, her strength. But tonight, she'd reclaimed a piece of Charleston, too, not by shouting, but by showing up. The guitarist's melody lingered in her mind, a song of resilience, of roots. Sarah's journal waited in her bag, ready for a new entry. "I went. I stood. They saw me." She didn't know what would follow: forgiveness, distance, or something in between. But she knew this. She'd walked into that room as herself, and no one could take that away. The stars above Charleston shone brighter now, and Sarah drove on, her heart full, her truth alive, her mother's smile etched forever in her soul. The Charleston night wrapped Sarah Mitchell in a warm, humid embrace as she drove away from the Palmetto house, the restaurant's golden lights fading in her rearview mirror. At 32, Sarah was the co-founder and chief operating officer of FreightFlow, a Seattle-based AI logistics startup that slashed emissions and redefined supply chains. But tonight, she wasn't the executive commanding boardrooms. She was a daughter who'd walked into her mother's 60th birthday uninvited, defying her father's texts. "Stay away, Sarah. Let's keep the peace." She'd gifted her mother, Ellen, a custom family recipe book, its azalea, embossed cover a tribute to their shared love of growing things. And then Nate, her sister Lily's boyfriend and a new FreightFlow hire, had stood up, his voice cutting through her father's mockery. "She's my boss." That moment, raw and unscripted, had shifted the room, leaving Sarah with a quiet triumph as she left. Now, alone in her rental car, the cobblestone streets of Charleston stretching before her, she felt the ripples of truth spreading, touching her family, touching her. Sarah's hotel room was a sanctuary of clean lines and soft linens, a contrast to the emotional storm she'd just navigated. She kicked off her heels, her green dress still crisp, the FreightFlow pin glinting on her lapel. She sat on the bed, her journal open, but words felt too small for what she'd experienced. The Palmetto house had been a battlefield of expectations. Her father, Thomas, with his sharp-edged jest. Her sister, Lily, silent and conflicted. Her mother, Ellen, tearful and grateful. Nate's defense had been a lightning strike, illuminating Sarah's world. FreightFlow's $20 million funding, her leadership of a diverse team, her STEM scholarship for Seattle youth. To her family, she'd been a shadow, the daughter who'd left at 21 with $500 and a dream. Tonight, they'd seen her, not as a rebel, but as a force. She closed her journal, her gaze drifting to the recipe book's Tweena copy she'd kept for herself, its pages filled with Ellen's pecan pie recipe, her grandmother's cornbread, stories of Charleston summers. Giving it to her mother had been like planting a seed, a hope that their connection could grow again. Ellen's touch, her whispered, "I'm so glad you're here," had been a balm soothing years of distance. Sarah had expected rejection, maybe indifference. Instead, she'd felt seen, not by everyone, but by the one who mattered most. She stood, walking to the window, Charleston's historic skyline glowing under the stars. The city that had once felt like a cage now held a piece of her heart, reclaimed in that single brave act of showing up. Her phone buzzed, a voicemail from her cousin, Anna, who'd been at the party. Sarah hesitated, then played it. "Sarah, I had no idea what you've built. I'm sorry we didn't ask. You were incredible tonight. Call me, okay?" Anna's voice cracked, heavy with regret. Sarah's chest tightened. Anna had always been kind, but distant, caught in the family's narrative that Sarah was different. The voicemail was a crack in that narrative, a sign that Nate's words had reached beyond the room. Sarah didn't call back, not yet. She needed time to process, to let the moment settle. But Anna's message was a ripple, proof that truth, once spoken, couldn't be undone. The next morning, Sarah was sipping coffee in the hotel lobby when Ellen arrived, unannounced, a Tupperware of homemade lemon squares in her hands. "You always loved these," Ellen said, her smile tentative. Sarah's heart leapt. They sat in a quiet corner, the morning light soft through the windows. Ellen's eyes traced the room, as if seeing Sarah's life for the first time. "I didn't know, Sarah," she said, her voice low. "About your company, your team, all of it. We didn't give you room to shine." Sarah reached for her mother's hand, her voice gentle. "You gave me enough, Mom. You listened when I talked about code, even if it didn't make sense." Ellen's tears fell, and Sarah felt a weight lift. They talked for hours about freight flow, Seattle's gardens, Ellen's dream to visit. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start, a seed taking root. Back in her room, Sarah's phone rang. It was Lily, her voice hesitant. "I'm not sure why I'm calling," Lily said, then paused. "Nate told me what happened after you left. He couldn't stop talking about you. Your strength, your calm. I've never seen you that way." Sarah stayed quiet, letting Lily's words unfold. "I was jealous," Lily admitted, her voice cracking. "You left and I stayed. And I thought that made me better. But you're incredible, Sarah." "I'm sorry I didn't ask about your life." Sarah's throat tightened. "You're not less, Lily," she said. "We're just different. And that's okay." Lily exhaled, a sound of release. "Mom wants to visit you." "I think I do too." Sarah's heart softened. "You're both welcome. Always." Sarah hung up, her mind replaying the party. Thomas's silence had been louder than his scorn, a sign he'd been shaken. Lily's call, Ellen's visit, Anna's voicemail. They were ripples, small but real, spreading from Nate's stand. Sarah had gone to Charleston expecting to make peace with rejection. Instead, she'd sparked a reckoning, not with anger, but with presence. She opened her laptop, drafting an email to her freight flow team, updating them on her trip. She mentioned a new idea, a community garden in Charleston, a tribute to Ellen, where local kids could learn to grow food and code, blending her worlds. The idea felt right, a way to plant roots without losing herself. She thought of her Seattle loft, her urban garden, her podcast, Women in Tech, breaking ground. Recording last week's episode, she'd said, "You don't need permission to be powerful." That was her truth now. Carried from Seattle to Charleston, echoed in Nate's voice, in Ellen's tears, in Lily's apology. Sarah wasn't the daughter who'd left anymore. She was the woman who'd returned, not to fit their mold, but to show them hers. She walked to the hotel balcony, Charleston's church steeples rising against the dawn. The city felt different now, less like a weight, more like a memory she could choose to carry. Sarah's journal beckoned, and she wrote, "I showed up. They saw me. And I saw myself, too." The ripples of that night would keep spreading through her family, through Charleston, through her own heart. She didn't need everyone's approval, just the courage to be herself. Ellen's lemon squares sat on the table, a taste of home. Sarah took a bite, the sweetness grounding her. She'd return to Seattle tomorrow, to her team, her garden, her life. But tonight, she was here, in Charleston, where truth had found its voice, where love had found its way, where Sarah had found her peace. The Seattle dawn broke gently, casting a soft glow over the waterfront as Sarah Mitchell laced up her running shoes for a charity 5K along Puget Sound. At 32, she was the co-founder and chief operating officer of FreightFlow, a logistics AI startup that slashed emissions and redefined efficiency. But today, her focus wasn't on the $20 million Series B round or her team of 50 innovators. It was on the quiet shift within her, sparked by her uninvited appearance at her mother's 60th birthday in Charleston, South Carolina, 2 weeks ago. Her father, Thomas, had barred her from the Palmetto house, texting, "Stay away, Sarah, let's keep the peace." She'd gone anyway, gifting her mother, Ellen, a family recipe book, and Nate, her sister Lily's boyfriend and a FreightFlow hire, had declared, "She's my boss," forcing her family to see her truth. Now, as Sarah stretched by the starting line, a letter from Thomas, delivered to her hotel as she left Charleston, weighed on her mind. It was an olive branch, fragile but real, and it marked the beginning of a reckoning for him, and for her. The charity run, supporting Seattle's STEM scholarships, was Sarah's way of grounding herself. She'd launched the scholarship last year, inspired by her own journey from a Charleston coder to a tech leader. As she jogged through the crowd, the salty breeze mingling with cheers, she thought of her mother's visit after the party. Ellen's lemon squares and tearful apology. "We didn't give you room to shine," had opened a door. Lily's call, admitting jealousy and seeking connection, had widened it. But Thomas, with his stern silences and rigid expectations, remained a wall. His letter, tucked in her journal, was the first crack. "Sarah," he'd written, "I was wrong to push you away. You're more than I understood. I'm trying to see you now. No signature, no warmth, but an admission a step toward her world." Sarah's pace quickened, her sneakers pounding the pavement. She'd returned to Seattle renewed, her loft's urban garden thriving with lavender and thyme, her podcast, Women in Tech, breaking ground, gaining listeners. At FreightFlow, she'd mentored Nate during a recent hackathon, his gratitude palpable as he refined a routing algorithm. "You make us better," he'd said, echoing the respect he'd shown in Charleston. That moment Nate standing, his voice firm, had been a pivot, not just for her family but for Sarah. She'd gone to prove she belonged. She'd left knowing she didn't need to. Her family's approval, once a tether, was now a choice. One she could make with grace, not desperation. Back at FreightFlow, Sarah's office was a haven of purpose. Whiteboards scrawled with equations, a potted lavender plant, a photo from the Olympic National Forest retreat. She'd opened Thomas's letter again yesterday, its words raw in the morning light. He'd called her "more than I understood," a phrase that lingered like the scent of her garden. Thomas had always valued order. Lily's life, with her Charleston home, husband, and kids, was his ideal. Sarah's path, leaving at 21 with $500, building FreightFlow, leading a diverse team, was chaos to him. He'd seen her as a rebel, not a visionary. But Nate's words, her mother's tears, her own presence had shaken him. Sarah didn't gloat. She felt a quiet sorrow, not for herself, but for the years they'd lost to misunderstanding. She crossed the 5K finish line, her breath ragged, the crowd's applause warm. A volunteer handed her a medal, and Sarah smiled, thinking of her scholarship kids, one of whom, Aisha, had joined the run. Aisha's hug, her whispered, "Thank you," was a reminder of why Sarah led not for praise, but for impact. She walked to a nearby bench, pulling out her phone. A text from Ellen. "Planted azaleas today. Thinking of you." Sarah's heart softened. Their talk in Charleston had been a bridge, rebuilt with honesty. Ellen's promise to visit Seattle, to see freight flow and Sarah's garden, was a commitment to know her daughter, not just love her. Sarah's thoughts turned to Thomas. His letter wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was an acknowledgement. She remembered a Charleston summer, age 10, when she'd built a model delivery drone from cardboard. Thomas had glanced at it, muttering, "Cute," before turning away. Ellen had asked, "How does it fly?" That question had fueled Sarah's dreams. Thomas's dismissal had too, in its own way pushing her to prove herself beyond his gaze. Now, his letter suggested he was trying, however clumsily, to see her. Sarah didn't need his pride, but she wanted his effort, a sign that the wall between them could crumble. A package had arrived yesterday, sent from Charleston. Inside was a family heirloom, silver compass, passed down from her grandfather, a sailor. Thomas's note was brief. "You always found your way." Sarah had held the compass, its weight heavy with meaning. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was his language, a quiet admission that her path, though different, was true. She'd placed it on her desk, beside her lavender plant, a symbol of navigation, not just across oceans, but through life. Sarah didn't hate her father. She understood his fear of change, his need for control. Understanding didn't erase the hurt, but it made forgiveness possible. Not as surrender, but as strength. At Freight Flow, Sarah met Nate for a mentoring session, reviewing his latest algorithm. His confidence had grown since Charleston, his respect for her unshaken. "You changed how I see things," he said, hesitating. "Not just here, but back home." Sarah nodded, her voice gentle. "You changed things too, Nate. You spoke when it mattered." Their exchange was brief, but it solidified a bond, a shared understanding that truth, once voiced, reshaped everything. Sarah thought of Lily, who'd called to apologize, and Anna, her cousin, whose voicemail had offered connection. The ripples from that night were spreading, softening the edges of her family's story. Sarah returned to her loft, the compass catching the evening light. She opened her journal, writing, "Dad's trying. I'm trying too. Not to fix everything, but to let it be enough." Her podcast's latest episode, about forgiveness, was set to drop tomorrow. "You don't forgive to forget," she'd recorded. "You forgive to move forward." That was her truth now, guiding her as she planned a Charleston community garden, a tribute to Ellen, where kids could code and grow. It was her way of giving back, of blending her worlds without losing herself. The Seattle stars emerged, bright against the dusk. Sarah thought of her garden, her team, her scholarship kids. They were her home, her legacy. But Charleston was part of her, too, not the city that had pushed her away, but the one she'd reclaimed with courage. Thomas's letter, the compass, were steps toward her. Proof that even the most stubborn hearts could shift. Sarah didn't need his full understanding, just his willingness to try. She closed her journal, the compass steady on her desk. Forgiveness wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one she was ready to take, with grace, with strength, with the woman she'd become. The Seattle summer sun bathed Sarah Mitchell's new home on Bainbridge Island in a golden glow, its modern glass walls reflecting the Puget Sound and the redwoods that framed her garden. At 37, Sarah was the co-founder and chief operating officer of Freight Flow, a logistics AI startup that had transformed supply chains, cutting emissions by 25% and securing $20 million in funding. 5 years ago, she'd walked uninvited into her mother's 60th birthday at the Palmetto House in Charleston, South Carolina, defying her father Thomas's texts. "Stay away, Sarah. Let's keep the peace." That night, her gift of a family recipe book and Nate's bold defense, "She's my boss," had cracked her family's misconceptions, revealing her as a leader, not a rebel. Now, as she prepared to host her mother Ellen's 65th birthday at her home, Sarah felt a quiet triumph. This wasn't just a party. It was a redefinition of family, built on mutual growth, not rigid expectations. Sarah's home was a haven, its open-plan kitchen filled with the scent of her mother's pecan pie, a recipe she'd baked since her lonely Seattle days. Her urban garden, now sprawling with lavender, thyme, and azaleasa, nod to Ellen spilled onto the patio, where fairy lights twinkled for tonight's celebration. Sarah adjusted a photo wall in the living room, A mosaic of moments. Her freight flow team at their Olympic National Forest retreat. Her Charleston childhood with Ellen in the garden. Her scholarship kids coding at a Seattle workshop. The wall was her story, blending past and present, family by blood and by choice. She'd launched a mentorship program at Freight Flow last year, pairing senior engineers with young coders, inspired by her own journey. One mentee, Aisha, now a college freshman, had texted yesterday, "You showed me I belong." Sarah's heart swelled. Family wasn't just who you were born to, it was who you lifted up, who grew with you. The party was hours away, and Sarah moved with purpose, setting out tables, checking the crab cakes Ellen's favorite prepared by a local chef. 5 years ago, Charleston had been a battleground. Thomas had mocked her arrival, Lily had stayed silent, and Sarah had left after Nate's stand, her mother's tearful gratitude her only anchor. But ripples had followed. Ellen's hotel visit, Lily's apologetic call, Thomas's letter admitting he'd underestimated her. A silver compass, a family heirloom, had arrived later with his note. "You always found your way." Those moments, fragile but real, had rebuilt bridges. Tonight, they were all coming: Ellen, Thomas, Lily, Nate, even cousins like Anna, whose voicemail had sparked connection. Sarah wasn't erasing the past. She was rewriting what family could mean. She paused at the patio, her green dress catching the breeze, a Freight Flow pin glinting on her collar. Her podcast, Women in Tech, Breaking Ground, had grown, its latest episode on legacy resonating with thousands. "Family is where you're seen," she'd said, her voice steady. That was her truth now, guiding this night. Ellen arrived first, her sapphire scarf bright, her arms open. "Sarah, this place," she said, her eyes tracing the garden. "It's you." They hugged, and Sarah felt the warmth of their Charleston talks, when Ellen had promised to visit and kept her word. Ellen's visits had become regular, her curiosity about Freight Flow and Seattle's tech scene a gift. She'd even joined Sarah's community garden project in Charleston, teaching kids to plant while Sarah taught them to code. Lily and Nate arrived next, their toddler in tow, his giggles filling the air. Lily's embrace was tight, her voice soft. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. Not just for this, but for staying you." 5 years had softened Lily's envy, their calls now filled with stories of her kids and Sarah's team. Nate, now a senior analyst at Freight Flow, nodded at Sarah, his dimples flashing. "This is amazing," he said, gesturing to the patio. His respect, born that night in Charleston, had deepened through hackathons and mentorship. Sarah smiled. "You helped make it happen." Nate's stand had been a spark, but his steady presence at Freight Flow had been a flame, illuminating her worth to her family and herself. Thomas stepped onto the patio last, his posture stiff, his eyes scanning the scene. Sarah met his gaze, her heart steady. His letter, the compass, had been steps toward her, but this was their first meeting since Charleston. He said little, sitting quietly as guests arrived. Freight Flow colleagues, scholarship kids, Charleston cousins. The chef served crab cakes, champagne flowed, and Lily unveiled a cake, its icing dotted with azaleas. Nate presented a slideshow of family photos, from Charleston summers to Seattle visits, Sarah's face woven through them all. The crowd laughed, clapped, and Sarah felt a shift. This wasn't just a party. It was a homecoming, not to her family's old rules, but to a new understanding. As the evening deepened, Thomas approached Sarah on the patio, his hands in his pockets. "You built something here," he said, his voice low, his eyes on the sound. "Something real." Sarah nodded, waiting. He cleared his throat. "I was wrong to push you out. You didn't just find your way, you made one." His words weren't warm, but they were honest, a reckoning years in the making. Sarah's throat tightened. "I didn't want to leave you behind, Dad. I just needed to be me." He looked at her, not with the scrutiny of her childhood, but with a quiet respect. "You are," he said. "And we're here." It wasn't a full apology, but it was enough a crack in the wall, letting light through. Sarah returned to the party, her heart full. Ellen raised a glass, toasting family, old and new. Aisha, now mentoring others, hugged Sarah, whispering, "You're my family too." The photo wall glowed, a testament to Sarah's life Freight Flow's retreats, Charleston's gardens, Seattle's stars. She'd redefined family, not as those who demanded conformity, but as those who grew with her. Thomas sat with Ellen, watching, his silence softer now. Lily and Nate danced with their son, their laughter blending with the music. Sarah stood at the edge, her garden alive around her, and realized she'd done more than host a party. She'd built a space where everyone belonged, where truth was enough. Her journal waited in her study, a new entry forming. Family isn't a place, it's a choice to see, to grow, to stay. I chose it tonight. Her mentorship program, her garden, her podcast, they were extensions of that choice, ways to lift others as she'd been lifted. 5 years ago, she'd gone to Charleston to be seen. Now, she'd brought Charleston to her, not to prove herself, but to share herself. The stars above Bainbridge Island shone bright, and Sarah raised her glass, her voice soft. To family, she whispered, meaning everyone, her team, her scholarship kids, her mother's smile, her father's effort, her sister's growth. She'd redefined family, not by erasing the past, but by embracing the present, with grace, with love, with the woman she'd always been. The Seattle twilight settled over Sarah Mitchell's Bainbridge Island home, its glass walls reflecting the Puget Sound's gentle ripples and the redwoods that cradled her urban garden. At 37, Sarah was the co-founder and chief operating officer of FreightFlow, a logistics AI startup that had reshaped supply chains, cutting emissions by 25%, and securing $20 million in funding. Her journey had begun 5 years ago, when she defied her father Thomas's texts. "Stay away, Sarah. Let's keep the peace," to attend her mother Ellen's 60th birthday at the Palmetto House in Charleston, South Carolina. That night, her gift of a family recipe book and Nate's bold defense, "She's my boss," had shattered her family's misconceptions, revealing her as a leader. Now, as she stood in her study, a framed quote from a FreightFlow strategy session, "Build so well they can't look away." Hanging above her desk, Sarah felt the weight of her legacy. It wasn't just her company or her reconciliation with her family. It was the grace she'd chosen, the truth she'd lived, and the invitation she extended to others to do the same. Sarah's home was a sanctuary, its open spaces filled with light and memory. Her garden, lush with lavender, thyme, and azaleasa, tribute to Ellen, spilled onto the patio, where she'd hosted Ellen's 65th birthday last summer. That night, with fairy lights glowing and crab cakes served, had been a triumph. Ellen toasting family, Lily and Nate dancing with their son, Thomas admitting, "You built something real." A smaller frame on her desk held a sticky note from that Charleston night. Nate's words scrawled by a colleague. "She's my boss." It wasn't a trophy, but a reminder of what she'd proven to herself, not others. Sarah had redefined family, not as those who demanded conformity, but as those who grew with her. From her FreightFlow team to her scholarship kids to the Charleston relatives who'd learned to see her. She walked to the living room, her photo wall a tapestry of her life, her team at the Olympic National Forest retreat, her Charleston childhood with Ellen in the garden, her STEM scholarship kids coding in Seattle. Last month, she'd launched a FreightFlow mentorship program, pairing engineers with young coders like Aisha, now a college sophomore who called Sarah her second mom. Her podcast, Women in Tech, Breaking Ground, had reached thousands. Its latest episode on legacy, urging listeners to build what lasts, not what's loud. 3 weeks ago, Sarah had delivered a TEDx talk in Seattle, her voice steady as she shared her story, leaving Charleston at 21 with $500, building FreightFlow, facing her family's rejection, and choosing grace over resentment. The audience's standing ovation had echoed her mother's tears, her father's quiet nod, her own heart's peace. Sarah's phone buzzed, a message from Ellen. "Visited the Charleston garden today. The kids love it." Sarah smiled. The community garden, her tribute to Ellen, was thriving. A place where Charleston youth grew vegetables and learned to code, blending her worlds. Ellen's visits to Seattle, her curiosity about FreightFlow, had deepened their bond. Lily, once envious, now called weekly, sharing stories of her kids and asking about Sarah's team. Nate, a senior analyst at FreightFlow, had become a friend, his respect unwavering since that night at the Palmetto House. Even Thomas had softened, his silver Compassa family heirloom sitting on Sarah's desk, its note, "You always found your way," a testament to his reckoning. He'd been wrong to push her out. He'd admitted last summer, and Sarah had forgiven him. Not to erase the hurt, but to move forward. She sat at her desk, opening her journal, its pages filled with 5 years of growth. After Charleston, she'd written, "I showed up. They saw me. I saw myself." Now, she added, legacy isn't what you leave. It's what you live. Her TEDx talk had crystallized that truth, her words reaching viewers worldwide. You don't need permission to be powerful. You need courage to be kind. She'd shared how Thomas's rejection had pushed her to build Freight Flow, how Ellen's love had kept her grounded, how Nate's stand had changed her family's story. The talk wasn't about triumph over others, but triumph within choosing grace when anger was easier, building bridges when walls were familiar. Sarah's legacy was everywhere. In Aisha's scholarship, her team's innovations, the Charleston Garden, her podcast listeners. But it was also in the quiet moments, like last summer's party, when Thomas approached her on the patio saying, "You didn't leave us behind. You made a place for us." He'd handed her a photo from her childhood, age 10, building a cardboard delivery drone, labeled Smart Moves Inc. On the back, he'd written, "You always knew." For the first time, Sarah had hugged her father, not as a daughter seeking approval, but as a woman who'd found her own. That hug, brief but real, was a cornerstone of her Legacia family, not bound by rules but by effort, by truth. She stood, walking to the patio, the sounds waves, a soft lullaby. Her garden glowed, azaleas blooming alongside lavender, a symbol of roots and wings. Sarah had launched a Freight Flow blog series, inviting readers to submit stories of resilience, a way to amplify voices as her podcast did. The first post, by a young coder inspired by Sarah's TEDx talk, had gone viral, proof that her story wasn't hers alone. She thought of her journal, her mentorship program, her scholarship kids. They were her family, as much as Ellen, Lily, Nate, and Thomas. Family wasn't a fixed circle, but a growing one, defined by those who saw you, who chose you, who stayed. Sarah's phone buzzed again, a notification from the blog. New submission, How I Found My Voice. She smiled, imagining the Rytera stranger, yet akin in spirit. She'd reply later, encouraging them to keep sharing. For now, she stood under the stars, her home alive with memories. 5 years ago, she'd gone to Charleston to be seen. Now, she was seen not just by her family, but by a world she'd shaped. Her legacy wasn't Freight Flow's profits or her TEDx applause. It was the grace she'd lived. Showing up, forgiving, building, loving. She raised a glass to the sound, her voice a whisper. To those still writing their stories. She turned back to her study, the framed, quote, "catching the light." Build so well they can't look away. Sarah had built that a life, a family, a legacy. She invited her readers to do the same. Share your story, she'd written in the blog's call to action. Tell us where you're from, what moved you, what you're building. Your words matter. She imagined responses flooding in from Seattle, Charleston, everywhere, each one a thread in the tapestry of resilience. Sarah's journey had begun with exclusion, but it ended with inclusion, not just of her family, but of anyone brave enough to stand in their truth. The Puget Sound shimmered, and Sarah closed her journal, her heart full. Her story was still being written, and so was theirs, with grace, with courage, with love that lasted. Sarah Mitchell's story began under the weight of exclusion, a single text from her father, Thomas, that cut deeper than any rejection she'd faced. Stay away, Sarah. Let's keep the peace. At 32, Sarah was the co-founder and chief operating officer of Freight Flow, a Seattle-based AI logistics startup that slashed shipping emissions by 25%, saved retailers millions, and secured a $20 million Series B round. Yet, in Charleston, South Carolina, her family saw her not as a visionary, but as the daughter who'd strayed, leaving at 21 with $500 and a half-finished computer science degree. Her mother Ellen's 60th birthday at the Palmetto House was a celebration she was barred from, her name absent from the guest list forwarded by her sister, Lily. That moment of omission, raw and deliberate, could have broken her. Instead, it ignited a journey of courage, truth, and grace that redefined her life, her family, and her legacy. Sarah's decision to attend the party wasn't born of defiance, but of a quiet resolve to be seen. She arrived in Charleston, her tailored green dress a symbol of her strength, carrying a family recipe book embossed with azaleas, a gift for Ellen, a bridge to their shared past. The room stilled as she entered, Thomas's mockery. "Look who decided to show up, a blade aimed to wound." But Sarah stood tall, her voice steady as she wished her mother well. Then Nate, Lily's boyfriend, and a new freight flow hire, rose, his words a thunderclap. "She's my boss." He unveiled Sarah's world, freight flow's impact, her leadership of a diverse team. Her integrity and the silence that followed was a reckoning. Ellen's tears, Lily's shock, Thomas's pale face marked a shift. Sarah left that night, not with vengeance, but with clarity, her mother's gratitude a light to carry back to Seattle. The ripples of that night spread far beyond the Palmetto house. Ellen visited Sarah's hotel, her lemon squares a gesture of love, her apology. "We didn't give you room to shine a step toward healing." Lily called, her jealousy giving way to admiration, her voice cracking with regret for not seeing Sarah's strength. Thomas sent a letter, admitting he'd underestimated her, followed by a silver compass, a family heirloom inscribed, "You always found your way." These moments, fragile yet profound, rebuilt bridges Sarah had thought lost. Back in Seattle, she thrived, her loft a haven, her urban garden blooming with lavender and azaleas, her podcast, Women in Tech, breaking ground, amplifying voices like hers. She launched a STEM scholarship, mentored coders like Aisha, and led Freight Flow with a vision that moved goods, ideas, and hope. 5 years later, Sarah hosted Ellen's 65th birthday at her Bainbridge Island home, its patio glowing with fairy lights, crab cakes served, and a photo wall weaving her Charleston roots with her Seattle life. Thomas, once rigid, stood on her patio, admitting, "You built something real." Lily and Nate, now integral to her world, laughed with their son, while Ellen toasted family old and new. Sarah's mentorship program at Freight Flow, her Charleston community garden, her TEDx talk on resilience all were threads in a tapestry of impact. She'd redefined family, not as those who demanded conformity, but as those who grew with her, from her team to her scholarship kids to the relatives who'd learned to see her truth. Sarah's legacy wasn't just Freight Flow's success or her family's reconciliation. It was the grace she chose when rejection loomed, the courage she summoned to show up, the love she offered despite silence. Her journal, filled with entries from Charleston to Bainbridge, held her truth. Legacy isn't what you leave, it's what you live. Her blog series, inviting readers to share stories of resilience, and her TEDx talk, viewed worldwide, extended that truth, urging others to build lives they couldn't look away from. Sarah's story began with a text that tried to erase her, but it ended with a home filled with laughter, a family redefined, and a world inspired. The lesson of Sarah's journey is profound. Your worth isn't defined by those who exclude you, but by the truth you live with courage and grace. Sarah didn't need her family's approval to lead Freight Flow, mentor Aisha, or plant gardens in Charleston. She needed her own belief, her own strength, to stand in rooms where she wasn't wanted and offer love anyway. This lesson speaks to anyone who's felt unseen by family, colleagues, or society. It's a call to show up as you are, not as others expect, and to build a life that reflects your values, even when the world pushes back. In today's fast-paced, often divided world, Sarah's story offers practical wisdom. First, embrace your truth. Like Sarah, journal your thoughts, reflect on your strengths, and name what makes you you. Whether it's coding, gardening, or teaching, let that truth guide your choices. Second, choose grace over resentment. When faced with rejection at work, in relationships, or within families, respond with integrity, not anger. Sarah's recipe book, her scholarship, her podcast were acts of love, not retaliation, and they opened doors no fight could. Third, build bridges. Reach out to those who misunderstand you, as Sarah did with Lily and Thomas, not to change them, but to invite connection. Small gestures, a call, a gift, a shared memory can shift hearts over time. Finally, create a legacy of impact. Start where you are. Mentor a colleague. Volunteer locally. Share your story online. Sarah's blog series began with a single post, but it grew into a movement, proof that one voice can inspire many. Sarah's journey reminds us that family, success, and belonging aren't fixed. They're choices, shaped by courage, grace, and truth. Wherever you are, Seattle, Charleston, or beyond, you're writing your story. Make it one that lasts. Not by shouting, but by building, loving, and showing up. Share your truth, as Sarah did, and watch the ripples spread. Your legacy, like hers, is waiting to bloom.